As you know, I thoroughly enjoy making tiny nano projects that test my patience and abilities. In this one, I'll show you how I made an incredible self-watering moss grotto using basic techniques, rocks, moss, and other accessible materials. A proper vessel or container to work in is always essential. I had this round acrylic tray on hand, which was perfect for the task. Of course, I also needed a light. Naturally, I couldn't just use it though. It requires a base to mount on. This scrap piece of wood from the Waterfall Edge Terrarium coffee table was the best option I had on hand. I traced the container's shape onto it, along with an offshoot for the light itself. I loosely cut it out with a jigsaw and sanded around the edges to refine the shape. The light is designed to be secured with a bolt from the bottom, so I created a countersink on the offshoot and a hole to mount it through. Then I gave it the old Shosugi Bon wood burning technique. Completely burning the outside with a torch, followed by a light sanding to remove surface char, produces an amazing product. This of course matches other elements in the studio, where it will rest on the countertop. Although probably not needed, these felt pads will protect that from being scuffed. After installing the light and adding the tray, you can get a fuller picture of what I've been creating. I think this looks incredible and will be the perfect foundation for an intricate nature design. Now that I have escaped Dojo again, I can easily access materials and test concepts before moving to the actual project. That's especially helpful here because of how easily acrylic scratches. Anyway, I've envisioned a cave or grotto of sorts from the start. Dragonstone was the obvious choice because of how easily it stacks to create detailed, cohesive structures. Well, easy when compared to other materials. The process is still quite tedious. Joining smaller stones to the sides of larger ones will produce overhangs and facilitate the look I'm imagining. However, they don't stay on their own. I tried to wire them in place while I experimented, but it didn't work. Instead, I'd have to take a slow and methodical approach, working directly on the final design, one stone at a time. I set whatever I wanted to link up, using other stones to stabilize them while I mixed up a two-part epoxy. This will be one of my best friends throughout the build. Pressing it between the stones easily and effectively merges them together. That said, there's always a catch. In this case, the epoxy has to cure for around 30 minutes before I could move on to the next. I knew that if I had any hope of producing lasting results, I had to take my time and trust the process. I'd place a stone, carefully step back to check placement, mix up epoxy, and hold my breath as I pressed it between contact points. That said, once the epoxy cured between steps, it was extremely satisfying to pull away the anchoring rocks and observe the overhang taking shape piece by piece. Till this point in the project, I've really just added small pieces which are precariously hanging off the side. Adding this large one will stabilize those and create a unique feature. However, something I had to consider is that all of this will line up differently in the container itself because the sand is uneven. It all has to sit level, and to ensure this would be the case, I decided to attach it outside of the dojo. That was the plan at least. When I tried, I didn't like how short it was without the sand lifting it up. I quickly devised a solution though. I moved everything back to the dojo as it was before and applied the epoxy. After it cured, I moved it to the table once more and situated smaller stones in the front and back to level it out. Of course, I epoxied these in, and now the foundational scape is complete. It looks awesome in the tray as well, don't you think? Unfortunately, I can't just go and use it though. There are too many gaps that won't allow water to flow. I situated rocks in these areas and utilized expanding foam to waterproof the remaining void space. About 10 minutes later, I pressed down the expanded areas and scraped off excess. No need to reinvent the wheel with water either. I simply attached a vinyl tube to a small pump, dropped it into the dish, filled it with water, and gave it a test run. It worked, but the water was really ripping through. I adjusted that accordingly. Additionally, I wanted the flow to begin at the top of the largest rock. I had to break a piece off the front to make that happen. That's better, but it still looks a little wacky and is much louder than I want. I don't know about you, but that sound would drive me nuts if I hear it longer than I have to. Java moss and additional stones are probably the easiest way to dampen that. I placed the moss within the flow of water to dial in the chaos. I also added a rock in the bottom to minimize dripping. The tubing is too visible as well, but it's an easy edit. I drilled holes through the rock and locked it in with stainless steel wire. This allowed me to achieve a seamless appearance without the need for excess components. Another element that will make this concept possible is moisture wicking fabric. Chopping it up into manageable pieces and situating it in areas with access to water creates an ideal growing surface for moss. I'm not sure how well you can see it, but this section is becoming saturated over a few minutes' time. Now moss will grow in a place that would otherwise be dry. Although I've used Java moss already, I wanted more texture and color. It's freezing outside right now, but I was able to find a few varieties that will work perfectly for this. I just rinsed them off to remove debris, and they were good to go. Again, the fabric alone is an ideal environment for moss to grow. For me, the moss part is always when the vision begins to truly take shape, and that couldn't have been more true for this one. The combination of fabric and moss made it possible to mimic an actual mini landscape. You'll notice that I used a few varieties as well. The difference in texture and shades of green makes for a more dynamic design. Furthermore, there were plenty of wet areas where I could directly add moss without fabric. Needless to say, I took full advantage of those. However, even at this point, the water dribble at the bottom still wasn't what I wanted. Adding this small rock was a great way to build upon the scape and soften the drip. I just had to stabilize it from underneath with epoxy. I continued to build out the scape further to portray the appearance of a mountain range instead of a column. As I'm sure you'd guess, I secured them with foam, which I had to trim later. In my opinion, the addition of these stones bolstered the appearance and took it to the next level. They're missing moss though. That's nothing a little fabric won't solve. Moss's ability to add so much life to hardscape is something I never get tired of. It's just incredible to see. And although it looks awesome already, it's the details that always take it to the next level. I had to vacuum out water to remove debris before I could get started. I wrapped the pump in an old sponge filter to protect the intake as well. This gravel doesn't match the dragonstone at all, but I had to include it to build depth. I didn't have much sand to work with, which I added above this and in the pulling area atop the hardscape. I also placed smaller stones throughout the sand in the foreground to accentuate everything else. After moving and filling it back up, I got the pump running. I felt that more foliage in the water feature would help, but I kept it simple with the Nubius nana petite. It's important to note that I'm only planting the roots. The rhizomes have to remain above the substrate or the plants won't last. Above the water in various mossy pockets, I nested Ficus pumila quercifolia. Finally, I added a small bunch of Selaginella uncinata as a feature plant. Taking a step back from it all, I'm really pleased with how it came together. It's always a toss-up with how much detail to add, but this is a perfect example of less is more. There were many elements I intended to add, like driftwood or jungle vines, but as I worked through this, simplicity made more sense. This best showcased the features I wanted to be the focus of this, like the hardscape design, moss, and the overall cohesiveness of the piece. Furthermore, I didn't want water ripping through how it was initially. I don't know about you, but I think little drips within the grotto area and the constant cascade moving along the surface of the rocks is stimulating to watch. I knew I wanted the first video of 2024 to be a build, but it was great to get back in the studio. Now that I think about it, this was actually the first one I've done since completing the Nature Design Studio. Moss has been a huge part of the channel since the beginning, so it seems like a fitting way to do that and bring in the new year.